Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 6, Episode 36 of our weekly P&Q&C&A&T videos. I think we can actually go through all the letters this week. P stands for podcasts and Patreon and patrons, because we like to upload this in podcast form, and as you've taken to saying and I've sort of picked up over time, one of the main reasons that we're able to do this is because of the support of our patrons on Patreon.
Absolutely true.
And Sorry, I need to look at the letters so I don't get myself mixed up. The Q stands for questions. C stands for comments, because not every question we pull, or not every comment we pull is a question. The A stands for answers, corresponding with questions. And the T is for talking, which when they comment, we can't really answer it, so we just talk. And also, a lot of times we just talk anyways. People ask a question, and we'll start to answer it, and then we'll get sidetracked, and we'll just talk about some other random crap for a while.
Right. And I'm going to point out for people who are listening to us but not watching us. So we've taken a recent request that we switch up the teams. This is actually not so much of a switch up because we just did this Arkham team on the weekend, but we did make the change. We talked about how the loadout was really important for Arkham Knight Catwoman, but that there was flexibility in keeping Batgirl and Killer Croc just as good, and we did. So we've got Leo Assassins and Knives on Batgirl, and we've got Charged Disc on Killer Croc.
Oh, that's true. I forgot. You said, for those of you who aren't watching, I forgot to mention that if you want to listen to this in podcast format, if you're currently on the video, links in the description for all the major podcasting platforms and the general RSS feed. Not that many people choose to listen to it that way, but I think out of the people who do, it probably matters enough to them to be able to access it that way for stuff like listening at work.
That's true. Absolutely.
So there we go. Our first comment comes from Bruce Laredo, and it's in reference to our discussion of The Boys last week on a Q&A.
So that's the show on Amazon's Prime Video platform.
Yeah. And he says, loved your commentary on The Boys, especially because the scene you dissect is one of my favorite one of my favorite moments of the show. Anyway, I finished the show recently and thought it was incredible. I know the show is pretty graphic, but I would totally enjoy hearing more of your thoughts on the show. Also, have to say, Cable 2 Electric Boogaloo is a counterpoint to your earlier statement that you are both creatively bankrupt. So there we go. Thanks for the question, Bruce. And I think this is going to be one of those rare cases in which we are going to make an attempt to timestamp, because we are going to be talking, I think, about The Boys maybe a little more openly here.
That's a good point.
So we will make an effort to have in the description of this video and in the description of the podcast, wherever we decide to stop talking about this.
Right.
But for the next little chunk, assume that if you don't want The Boys, the the Amazon Prime show spoiled for you, you might not want to listen to the rest of this chunk here.
Everybody thinks it's funny, right? Because first, totally going to the weeds, even though the question itself is going to the weeds considering we're an Injustice channel, but when you said it's a Netflix show, so there was a whole thing where there was a petition to ban Good Omens, and I can't remember which religious group they sent a letter, and they were asking Netflix to take down their show. And I think this is one of the benefits, and I don't know how it translates into real value for the channel, but being the first into that particular, the streaming thing, that's category, the first in category, offers you a huge advantage because...
Or like the first quality product in that category, the first one that got popular.
Right. So it's interesting that the idea of Netflix, and I wonder if this will last, because what we're seeing is Disney taking over, Disney bought out Marvel, and now they're
splitting off. Yeah, it's the same thing we talked about last time.
Yeah, so I wonder how much, whether Netflix is going to survive, and if Netflix doesn't survive, whether, I guess, and I should probably talk a little bit more about why I think Netflix, there's a chance it might not survive, is whether people will still call it Netflixing. They don't. They don't. They say call it Netflix as the idea of the streaming service if Netflix doesn't make it.
I think what's interesting is, there's people have talked about the fact that piracy is essentially a service problem, right?
It's a pricing problem, I think.
Well, not just it's a little bit of both. But if there is a service that is preferable to piracy, you'll see a decrease in piracy. And so I think Steam was the help cut down on a ton of online piracy, right? Where I think even at a time where I didn't have a lot of money, right, and I probably could have been pirating games, I pretty much just saved up for stuff on Steam. right?
Right, they have
Even
big
with,
sales and
disposable
huge
income.
discounts.
Yeah, and with Netflix, right? People pirate movies and content a lot less, and definitely in the earlier days of Netflix, that was even more true. Where I think less people were going on sketchy streaming sites to look for shows. But I think now with how fractured stuff has been and how not everything's on Netflix, you find a lot of stuff that you like that's on like only Hulu Plus or Hulu or Crave TV or a bunch of different sources, Amazon Prime, right? If I don't have a given service and I know the show's on it, I'm more likely to try to find a sketchy streaming site if it's just not on Netflix or one of the two I already have.
That's true.
So I stopped for a while. I wasn't using any like streaming, and I wasn't really looking for any sort of extra legal methods of accessing like TV shows and movies. And now I'm sort of back to it. I'm watching It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And I think it's on like Hulu Plus, and I'm like, I'm not gonna buy Hulu Plus. I already have Netflix. I guess I just have to find a site to get it to watch it off of.
All right. So this is an extension again of the discussion last week, but there's a danger where this is a service that's disrupted the whole business plan of cable.
Yeah.
And as it starts to replicate cable again, it needs its own disruptor, right? Because it's once Disney starts taking all their content out, and then Amazon. I think there was a show. What was a show that I saw that was on Prime that we watched on Netflix? I can't remember it. It's it's just that's the kind of thing that's gonna make people want to, like you, want to go somewhere else. But it's the other part that I'm thinking of. I mean, we've gotten so used to streaming that, and I even see this. People poo-poo the idea of actually owning physical media that contains it, but then you actually still have control over the show that you love, that you still want to watch, and then all of a sudden, if that platform no longer wants to support it, the Detectorists, they took that off Netflix like months ago. I'd watched it fully once already, and you were starting to watch it, and now I don't think it's on any service.
It's sad because it's got to do with like the license renegotiations. I think that's the problem with a lot of content is it's much easier to find a lot of stuff now than it used to be. But it's still, I think it got easier, and I think it's becoming maybe slightly harder again.
It got easier for a few shows. Like the really popular stuff, you're going to find it somewhere.
Yeah.
It's like this with, I think, any kind of creative endeavor, whether it's music or stuff. There's still music that is uncommon, and once there's demand for it, it becomes very expensive to get. Until there's there's enough of a push, but you never know when that's actually going to happen. Like Miracle Man.
Yeah.
The issues of that got really expensive because it wasn't available as reprint anywhere because it was caught up in all that legal thing between Todd McFarlane and then Neil Gaiman. And then it finally got resolved, and now it's being reprinted. And I think some of the issues are still valuable, but not nearly as much, right? But you never know when stuff like that is going to happen with a TV show or a movie.
It's interesting too the way that some stuff is moving, like streaming for music, right? Streaming has totally changed for music, and it's also apparently changed the way that artists interact with music,
right?
And making their music. Where shout out to the podcast, I only listen to the Mountain Goats, but I heard John Darnielle talk about it, and he said something along the lines of most artists can't afford not to tour anymore.
Right. Yeah, so they become less like creators of like recorded music than they are just the music is advertising sort of for their performances.
Where they used to be able to just make a record, and if it sold enough, right, they would sell a bunch of records, and they would make their money from it, and then they could just spend however long they needed to make their next one and live off of that, or just not make any more music at all because they'd made enough money.
And they would tour if they wanted to tour.
Yeah, because you get like a fraction of a cent per stream. You get like no money per stream.
Right.
So it's a business model where people aren't gonna buy your music by and large anymore, right? But streaming your music is like really not a good way for you to make money.
Right.
Like a really, really poor way for you to make money, actually.
So I should point out that there have actually been no spoilers yet.
Yeah.
So we've driven people away from listening to this because...
Well, I think when we put this in the description, we'll do a timestamp for when we start spoiling stuff, so that if they scroll down and look for the time where they stop it, they'll see that we don't actually...
And we got to remember at the end of the spoiler that we point out to people when it starts.
Yeah, so let's mark this as the real spoiler time. Okay, The Boys.
The Boys. All right, so I finished watching it recently. You watched it earlier.
Yeah.
I just finished watching it much later.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I loved it.
Oh, it was really, really spectacular.
and I'm not entirely surprised because it's Garth Ennis, and a lot of this is what's crazy to me. So there's a lot of media people identify with the stars, and they should, because the stars are the ones that are the face of the show. But I think in terms of what really captures your imagination and what really draws you in is the story. And there's that joke in Hollywood, right? That that actress was so dumb she slept with a writer. That the writers really don't get the kind of respect that they deserve for creating this thing that people get together. I'm not saying it right, but fundamentally this wouldn't exist without the writer.
Yeah, for sure.
And this is so what's great about The Boys is how it's in conversation with all the previous comic books. I mean, it's a show. I'm talking about a show, but knowing that it's a comic book,
with all the superhero stories.
Yes, and deconstructing them and looking at them in a way that people had spent decades not, because every time they went to comic book, they just, there are certain parts of their brain that I guess they just shut down in terms of their expectation of what the story would be. Or maybe it was the writers, or I mean, part of it is going to be the expectations of the readers. But I mean, this really started with, I think, Alan Moore.
Yeah.
In the 80s. And remember, all right, so was there anything before Swamp Thing that was really that it took the story that was taken for granted as being just, this is a comic book, so this is a comic book story. It didn't really bother anybody. And then he took that story, all right, so these are more spoilers for Swamp Thing if you don't know. So before Alan Moore came, Swamp Thing was this guy, Alec Holland, who was a scientist who got trapped inside a plant body, and his whole goal was to get out of this plant body. And all right, so here's another spoiler alert. He rewrote this. He didn't rewrite it. He took the story, and Alec Holland finally realized he's not a human anymore. He was a plant that thought he was a human. The same way planarian worms can eat other planarian worms and have the memory of how to finish a maze. That these plants had consumed Alec Holland, had taken his memories, and believed he was a man inside a plant body.
Yeah, it isn't like the artist formerly known as Prince. It's like the plant body who thinks they are the artist formerly known as Prince.
Yeah, and what was amazing about what he'd done was he took this idea that, that sort of didn't make sense and tried to give it this veneer, at least, of scientific plausibility.
Yeah.
And then he looked at all those elements of the story. Like in the next few years of writing Swamp Thing, he took all these elements of the story and sort of made fun of it in a way that only somebody who appreciates the art form can.
Yeah.
And then made it plausible and horrific in a whole new way. And then he did that with Miracle Man. We've mentioned that before. This is the whole origin of our Komodo, which was Miracle Man's magic word that would convert him from a regular human being into Miracle Man.
Yeah, spelled Kimota for some people who I think we get KOMODA more often because we don't enunciate well.
Right, and it's basically atomic backwards, but because the CI is, I guess, classically a soft C, like Simoda.
Yeah.
So he had to change it to K, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny that he's aware of it. I mean, I know linguistics is really popular now, but the idea that he realized that and fix it, I don't know, it's just cool. I mean, in this, we're talking about like 89, 90. So
yeah, so the Boys does a lot of similar things, and I like the Boys. I think in some ways it is really, really unrelenting with how brutal it is. Like even right from the start, right? Just there's a lot of scenes that just are like a little uncomfortable.
Not a lot of scenes. Like most of the scenes.
Yeah, there's a ton of scenes that are really uncomfortable, and like they do such a good job setting the tone. But then within that, they manage to find a lot of humor and find a lot of really good characterization. The actor who played Homelander is stellar.
In
their role.
That's the obvious parts. But to me, where it really hits, because what was interesting, we had a discussion, you, me, your mom, we were talking about the one scene, and this is a total spoiler, even if you've seen it, but you're watching it, but you haven't got to the end, you gotta stop listening now, where Homelander's wife is
right at the end.
Yeah, near the end.
Well, not Homelander's wife.
No, sorry, not Homelander's wife, Butcher's wife.
Yeah.
comes out of the room after having been with Homelander, what they said was 3 hours, and she's disheveled and putting on her shoes, and Butcher's belief up until that point had been that his wife had been raped by Homelander, and he wanted revenge.
Yeah.
And when both you saw it and I saw it separately, and we talked about it after, our first impressions were, oh, Butcher's wrong. She's a little disheveled. She's putting herself back together, but it wasn't that she was raped. This was her having an affair.
Yeah, it didn't have the appearance of violence.
No. And your mom's impression was that was still consistent with Butcher's belief that his wife had been raped. So that what's really cool about that, and I mean, not the idea that happened, but just the way the story is told, is that there's an ambiguity and a subtlety there that you... I want to say normally don't see that in comic books, but that's the conversation we would have had 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, there definitely is that kind of subtlety and that nuance, and that comic books have, because we've had so many years of where the visual effects have caught up to the stories that are actually in the books. Now they can focus less on here's a spectacle. Wow, look, a man really can fly, into the kind of stories that allows you to tell.
Yeah.
With superheroes in it.
And I think maybe out of the entire show, there's only maybe like one scene which I think sort of pulls its punches and ends up being a little bit tropey without being a smart examination of the trope.
Okay.
And I think it sort of makes sense for the type of story it is, but I would have liked to see something a little bit better, because there's sort of the back, I want to say third or quarter of it.
Okay.
Involves the main character. What's his name?
Huey.
Sorry, I've forgotten everybody's name at this point.
Okay, yeah, no, I just watched it recently.
Yeah, has Huey being pretty awful towards Starlight.
Which scene are you talking about?
I'm talking about the lead up to it, and then I'm going to talk about the scene.
Okay.
Right? Because the latter bit, right? She's like, oh, you've lied to me, right? He's like, hey, I need a favor from you, right? They have this sort of back and forth, right? So they talk, right? First.
Oh, okay.
And then he comes in, meets up with her, because she's like, I deserve an explanation. And then his friend shoots her, and he runs away.
Right.
He just bolts, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that you have him revealing himself to have been lying to her and manipulating her, right? And even though it's not that simple, right? He doesn't really... He does, right? At the end of the day, he is actually manipulating her and lying to her. And even though he eventually develops feelings, right? It mitigates it some, but... You know,
well, when they first met,
he wasn't correct.
Yeah, but when he met, she wasn't. This was an opportunity. When they first met, that moment was played and meant to be true and honest, and it worked. And I think I guess this is the interesting part, right? When I'm looking at it, when we're talking amongst the three of us, that I recognize how much my perspective is definitely male centered. Like what I do is identify with Huey way more than I do with Starlight.
Yeah. I think he was pretty awful to her for
he was, but it's not a great but that he was completely out of his depth.
He was, but just you have a couple scenes back to back where Huey totally sells her up the river.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then he says, hey, I need your help. Come get me. And then there's that scene where it's just that perfect moment where Starlight comes in and saves him.
And I am a fucking superhero.
Yeah.
Is what she says.
But I feel like that scene was like, I feel like that ended up being pretty tropey, and I'm not entirely sure I buy into it. Just with everything that had happened to her up till that point, like the 1, 2, 3 of Huey being like, I've been lying and manipulating you. And then she's like, I need an explanation. And then his friend shoots her and he bolts. And then he comes and says, hey, I need your help.
But all right, so here's the thing.
But the guilt trip, right?
Here's the thing. All right, so why I think it works is that she's not back with him. She's back because this is an opportunity to fix this wrong that has been done to all those children who never had a choice and were forced into these positions that they didn't want. And so
what she was doing in that scene was just saving him. She was specifically coming to help him in that scene. It wasn't. She could have let A-Train fight him.
Yeah.
And that would have been better off if she bolted.
Well, I guess
she really wanted to just help people.
All right. So again, maybe this is another example of when you really enjoy a piece of work and you make allowances for things. So in my mind, what I've created is that, so Huey and his friends are the ones that have discovered this, and she needs access to this information to be able to know what to do about it. She's been pretty much in the dark, even though she's one of the 7.
Yeah.
And so if she wants to be able to figure out what she can do, I mean, what her superpowers are really kind of fighting stuff. It's not like Translucent where he can sit in on somebody and listen in on the secrets and figure out what's going on. She's really like in your face kind of thing, right? So she does need Butcher and Huey and Frenchie and MM's help to figure out where she can apply the leverage to fix this problem and take down Vought.
That's probably fair enough. I'm just saying, for that one scene, that was the sort of one moment in the entire show where I felt, okay, I think they're falling into a little bit of a cheesy superhero trope. And I have no, like, large issue with that, because I feel like overall, you know, they get one, right?
Yeah.
And I the only reason I'm pointing it out, because in the average show, I wouldn't care, right? It's because, like, I don't even think that was explicitly bad. I'm saying that's the only moment where I feel like they maybe faltered a bit.
Is it mitigated
in my perception?
Is it mitigated at all by the scene before where Annie confronts her mom? Oh, interesting. I just realized Ann Cusack is the mom. She plays the mom. She's the sister of Joan Cusack and John Cusack, who are in a whole bunch of other things, who are clearly much more famous. But so she had that scene with her mom where she confronts her mom, and her mom admits that it's true. And her mom says, "Who told you?" And to me, it was very telling. She said, "A friend told me," and that she'd come back from the part where she thought she needs to arrest him, and that he's the criminal. To that there was still some element. There's some, even though he's still a bit of a dick, and maybe she just doesn't want to spend, you know, like romantic times with him. That there's something good in what he's done. And that he's given her at least this element of truth to free her from the lies that have not necessarily held her back, but have put her in this position, right?
Yeah, maybe. I read that as just, if you just say a friend told me, that's so much easier than going into the explanation. Like, that was not an important point to address in the conversation.
But she could have just said, it doesn't matter.
I
just found out, like, you know what I mean? Like, to me, that she was willing to say it. Like, the character doesn't strike me as the kind that's lends herself or sort of prone to lying or willing to lie. Like, that's how she's played, right? Out of all those superheroes there, she's still the one that's young enough and idealistic enough that she believes, I am a hero, I need to do good, and
she's also fast on her feet for talking too. I feel like you're right in the sense that she's not built up as a character who misplaces her words.
Right.
And now that I'm considering it, I wouldn't put it past the writer to specifically use that phrasing to mean something.
I love her as a character because what she really captures well is the vulnerability and the power at the same time.
Yeah.
So that the part where seems like she's really not sure of herself, she's coming to the 7, she's the noob, and that she's trying to come to grips with all these things that she's realizing about what she believed was a force for good, heroes, like the whole idea of, doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And now she's been disillusioned, and she's got the opportunity again, and she gets to be righteous, and she gets to be angry, and she gets to be good.
That's true. Yeah, it's just such a good show. It's hard to say too many, like, it's hard to even really go into too much of a deep dive on it or find too much space for analysis because it's just so really, really good. And one of the things I was thinking more about that specific scene that we talked about last time, right? With the
airplane.
Yeah, we can talk about it now in more detail because we're spoiling with the airplane where he just does the like 1, 2, 3 like quick like here's why it won't work right as it's happening.
Right.
And I think one of the other things that I really find interesting about it is that they're talking about the plane totally obeying the laws of physics, right?
Right.
But when you break it down, everything that he's doing is totally not. And I think it's really interesting because I think in a lot of superhero stories, when they're constructed, right, especially in comic books, it's like the superheroes totally don't obey the laws of physics.
Right.
And the world around them sort of obeys the laws of physics in a way that resembles ours. But when superheroes come into the mix, they also seem to be able to sort of distort how physics should work around them, right? Like when Superman, can like hold up a plane like that, right?
Right.
So
he's done it.
Yeah. So it's the stuff that they're interacting with too. But in The Boys, I think the thing that they did really well is they had the heroes sort of operate outside of the normal laws that we understand, right, for how the world works. But they made a really, really strong effort to make everything else operate very strictly within it. And I think that's the thing that they did differently, because I was thinking about it. And I'm like, well, it's not like they're going for complete realism here, right? Because they're still talking about a superhero. They're still talking about somebody who is powerful enough to slam himself up into the bottom of a plane, you know, without like, he's not like flapping his arms like a bird, right? It's not like Homelander is doing the necessary things to fly either, but what they're doing is they're having a really, really strict division in the world of the people with powers and people without it. And I think most superhero media doesn't do that, where the world around them is in the exact same way, like the laws of physics are malleable for them. Right.
So you bring up the idea of the consistencies, and I'll tell you, as much as I loved it, there's one thing that bugged me a bit, but I also recognize that if they'd fixed it, it would have been hard to make the story as tight as it was. So the idea that Compound V, when you give it to a kid, it gives them powers indefinitely. And then when you're an adult, that when you take it, it gives you powers, but then you go into withdrawal afterwards because you crash because you don't have it.
Yeah.
And physiologically, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like, if you're going to do something, there would be two different compounds. There'd be one that would sort of unlock it potentially, but it would be different than, because otherwise, in an adult, you give it to them.
You know, just boosts their powers again more.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could argue that it's something to do with developmental stages, right?
In that case, then you'd want to give it to them in utero. Like, then it wouldn't be the kids getting it, right?
Or there's some, like, critical period. Maybe it's in, like, the same part as, like, their capacity for, like, learning language develops or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, because there is specific, like, periods after birth, right? In which there are, like, skills that you're primed to learn. I don't know if that's physical or if that's just based off of the amount of time you spend outside the womb and the amount of time you've had to, like, listen to, like, or receive sensory input, right? Mm-hmm. But you could... again,
I mean, I'm thinking more along the lines of substances and stuff, and not necessarily... Like, there's nothing else, I think, that when you give it to a kid, they will start... basically, they become their own factory, right?
They'll get something forever, yeah. And then when you give it to them later, it's not...
It's a boost and then a crash, and then a boost and then a crash. I don't know. It was just, you know, like, you think of all the other things you can inject in people, like sugar.
Yeah.
It doesn't do that.
You're right. It would probably... I think the thing about that is... I don't know how hard it would have been necessarily to just make it something different. But I think it ties in, right? Unnecessary.
So all that stuff where, you know, they're getting the same... Yeah. They're shooting up with the same stuff that they're shipping to the different hospitals. Yeah. If there were different things... then they wouldn't be tied so closely together. I mean, it would be harder to have written a story.
That's true.
Like that.
And I think that's also probably based off of the source material. I think, at some point...
I want to read that. I'm gonna...
Yeah, it probably does seem worth reading. Yeah, but it's just a good show all around, sorry. And I think it's a really great demonstration of how good VFX can be for sure. TV now, right? Because that felt like very cinematic in nature. Yeah. And I think one really, really good example of great VFX is the channel Corridor on YouTube. The fact that people, like a small team of people working out of like a studio,
we should point out,
and like a hangar.
Since we were off it, did we mark off when the spoiler alert was done?
We didn't. Well, we've just been talking for a minute. We'll say about 28 minutes in.
All right. So just a reminder, if you're coming into the video, when did it start? When did the actual spoiler start?
9 minutes and 40 seconds. We'll mark both.
So you can go back to 9 minutes and 40 seconds and start watching again, even though we started talking about it maybe like after 5 minutes. 9 minutes is when 9 minutes and...
is when the spoilers actually cut it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so Corridor, and I think Corridor Crew is their secondary channel, and they do a really, really good job doing like really, really impressive VFX. And one of the things they've done recently on their second channel, the Corridor Crew, is they've started re-editing movies to be more realistic. So they've basically made like Captain America, a couple scenes super gory, and they re-edited Home Alone to be like appropriately gory for all the traps in the house. And so I think that's another really good example of how good VFX and like how realistic you can make a lot of these effects look with sort of budgets and in context that you never could before, right? Like
Right.
there was a time where you couldn't do this for anything, but now the boys can do this for an online prestige TV show,
Right.
which is crazy compared to the budget that movies get, right? Versus TV shows.
right.
And Corridor can do it for like the budget of a YouTuber with a Patreon account, right?
So this is what's interesting to me about Netflix when we talk about it as a business. I mean, I looked at it as a stock, and I can't remember how long ago it was, but the price to earnings ratio was in line with, say, like a tech company that people don't understand but are willing to invest in, so it's priced really high. So the price to earnings ratio is a high number.
Yeah.
But when you look at what they're doing, like I don't know how much of the money they're making is from this, but if they're putting any significant amount of their money into developing their own original
Well,
content,
they're not making money. Netflix
Well-
famously doesn't make money. They spend more money than they make.
Sure, but then the price to earnings ratio should reflect that. Like the fact that they're paying that the price of their stock is worth so much more than, say, a studio which is doing this not professionally, but doing this routinely. It in a lot of ways, to me, the fact that they're trying to do this is great for their core business to maintain subscriptions, but it's not great because it's much more expensive to do that kind of work and putting their resources into that instead of trying to get as much other people's content to put on.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how this works because I don't know what Netflix's long-term profitability model is.
Right.
Right? Because they're definitely not struggling.
Right.
But they're also spending more money than they have, and that is a slow slide into not having any money, right?
Like the difference between, say, something like Amazon, where they spend so much money, so instead of going to getting profits, they spend a lot of money trying to sort of corner the market, right? Increase their share of the online retail, and the end game really is that they're the place that everybody goes. So it's harder for anybody else to get caught up. Netflix's problem is that when somebody else decides to compete, they just have to pull their content. There's just a huge amount of content that right now, like I said, Disney's going to get. Who else is it? Hulu. Amazon Prime.
Crave TV.
So there's a lot of people already set up to take away their business.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit worried.
It is a little bit worrying for sure.
Yeah. Oh, and we still have some time. We had some questions, actually.
We have some more questions, yeah. And, for anybody who skipped our spoilers because they didn't want to hear spoilers for the boys, this is going to be an even shorter episode for them. So we do apologize for that. But yeah, our next question comes from Space Dog, and they say, what's your guys' opinion on Injustice 2 Mobile?
Yeah, it plays into the problem that we have where we can't play every game.
Yeah.
And it was okay. But the same way we couldn't keep on playing Immortals and we couldn't keep playing Mortal Kombat X Mobile and maintain any kind of expertise so that our channel would still be worth watching. It was okay. And it didn't take much. Like the only push we needed was to have an account suspended, the Warner Brothers being not responsive at all. I mean, we emailed them about the account and they never even sent an email back.
Yeah.
Never mind unsuspended the account. So, I mean, we were early enough that we could have probably started from scratch from something new. And it just wasn't worth it because of the time that we spend doing other stuff, like watching The Boys.
Yeah. Couldn't get into it properly, really.
Yeah, and it's not obvious how much time we spent. I mean, maybe less now, but how much time we spent developing the expertise.
Yeah.
I feel funny saying expertise, but I think that's the right word.
The way their gears were, where it was gears for each character, there were gears for every slot, and there wasn't the same variety in switching, right? That made it so much less fun for customizing, right?
Yeah, and it was clearly more a play-to-win model, so that...
Pay to win. Play to win is the model that you want. Yeah.
Yeah. So...
Hopefully you'd play to win.
There's... it's just... There were so many barriers, and it was just so much more grinding unless you were willing to put in the money.
Yeah.
So we've got videos if you want to see in our playlists. There's a specific
from a long time ago.
Yeah, there's definitely Injustice. There's a few Injustice 2 videos, but we haven't gotten back to it mainly because, we don't have enough time to really do anything on it.
Yeah, and we sort of just talk about stuff now. I mean, we just spent half an hour talking about The Boys that had nothing to do with Injustice. We still have the framework of making it about Injustice content, but we're just trying to do...
it's superheroes.
Yeah, we're doing whatever interests us now, really.
And we spent hours watching it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there we go. Unfortunately, it's not like something that we spent money on where we can claim it as like a business expense tax credit. We can't claim.
What do you mean? You like watching Prime Video?
Yeah.
Oh, technically we probably could.
We actually probably could do our Prime
That
account
would be business expense because we did it so that we could
made
have
content.
Exactly.
I was joking, but
no, I mean
it's like $5 a month or something.
But the problem is maybe $6 a month.
Yeah.
But the problem is that, well, it's not really a huge problem. It won't take much to sort of zero out any kind of income we've made based on the expenses like Prime or Netflix if we're going to be spending time talking about it.
That's true.
But that's okay. Actually, it probably makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
We'll keep that in mind for our taxes.
There we go. Anyways, our next two sort of comments come from two different people. They're related. We're going to go through one then the other. These are sort of, I don't need to preface them. First one comes from 4 Stupid Friends, and they say, wow, you still play this game. I stopped playing because it's been a long time since this game released, and not much people play this game now. And also, the developers may close this game any moment. And we have another question from Adesola Speller, or another comment. Sorry. Yeah. Again, let us know if we're pronouncing your name right, and if not, how to pronounce it correctly, and we will try to make the necessary changes for next time, if it comes up. They say, wow, you guys have stuck with Injustice this long. I haven't played in years, but your videos were always my favorite. I now play Lords Mobile. I wish the YouTubers for that game were as thorough and smart as you two.
Thank you.
Yeah, first off, thanks. That's really cool. We always like comments like that.
Well, I remember part of it isn't just the name; it's the little avatar that comes with it. So I recognize Adesola.
Yeah.
So it's great that you came back even for just that one video and that comment. But it sort of illustrates the point of how mobile games are so. They're like flies. They don't really have a long lifespan, and you don't expect it. And if anything, it's surprising when something lasts, when Injustice lasts as long as it does.
Yeah, there's like a handful of games that have a really long life cycle.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of games that come in and out really fast. I think Clash of Clans is one that's been around for a really long time. And it's been, it's hard for me to pick out the other ones.
Candy Crush.
Candy Crush is very enduring. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny because Candy Crush is the kind of game where it's not like they're actually giving you anything new. It's just like more levels. You just play. You spend time playing. And when you get stuck on a level, sometimes people want to spend a few bucks to get past where they're stuck.
Yeah.
Whereas something like Injustice doesn't lend itself to that, right? Like people, you can't just keep on giving them more fights that are a little bit harder each time.
Yeah.
Whether it's that it's the nature of the game or that the audiences expect something different. Everybody wants new content.
Well, and because with Candy Crush, to a certain extent, there is no new content really. Like even the remixes, like whether you've played a level and it's level 3,100 or 3,400, right? There's no way that you would be able to tell me what any one level looked like on Candy Crush or even any group of 100.
Right.
You would be able to tell me the category of level, and then I would say, has there been any of that type in the last 100 levels that have been any particularly harder or easier? You probably would not be able to give me any information about it because it's all essentially the same.
So Injustice itself has actually had new content over 5 years, and it's slowed down. Like it's been a few months since the introduction of the last few metal characters. But it is surprising that it's held our interest for as long as it has.
I think one of the things too is that it's the expectations of the genre. So for the kind of game Injustice is, you want to keep having new content. For the kind of game that Candy Crush is, if there's no new content, it doesn't matter the same way, right? Because your expectation of new content, if you talk about which one's mechanically more satisfying to play, Injustice is better than Candy Crush.
For sure. Yeah.
There's a lot more complexity. There's a lot more engaging as gameplay, right? If you talk about which one has more sort of meaningful progression, it's also Injustice. Instead of just the numbers getting higher and you get harder and harder stuff, right? Your reward for getting better at Candy Crush isn't really a reward at all, right?
Right. It is just time waster.
More content, exactly. Yeah. But in the same sense, I can probably, not specifically when you compare it to Injustice, but games similar to Injustice versus a game like Candy Crush, I can probably imagine myself spending more time playing Candy Crush once I had sort of reached a content wall, right, where everything was essentially the same, than I would playing a game that was similar to Injustice that didn't capture me in the same way.
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, when you talk about something like that, it really, there's no expertise necessary. Like, would you watch a video of somebody playing Candy Crush?
Probably not, no.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd watch a video of somebody playing Injustice either, though.
Well, somebody does.
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest pitfall. So So let's talk about this other game, Lords Mobile, in the abstract. So if we were to play a different game, and what I appreciate about the comment is that that the implication is that we're both thorough and smart. So we're playing with a little bit of self-awareness. Like we're paying attention to what's happening, not just like button mashing, right?
Yeah, and we always appreciate comments like that. That's always fun. I always like specific directed compliments like that because it means that they've thought about it enough.
But I think everybody does. Like compliments that are specific are much more meaningful than just say, "Hey, you're cool," or "Hey, that's good," right? But the time it takes to develop the what it takes to develop the expertise is basically time playing.
Yeah.
And
it's like a variation of the 10,000 hours by Malcolm Gladwell.
So the biggest problem with time playing is that anybody else can just as easily put in the time. And because we've got other things going on, you've got school, I've got work, to be able to put in the time, there are many other people who have better opportunities to do that before us. So to develop the expertise, and because the turnaround time in YouTube is just so short, I mean, way back when, in the 80s, they used to publish books with tips on how to play video games.
Yeah. And they still do sometimes.
They do, but
they do
I think
guides more.
The market for them is way smaller. So they would be, I mean, when you think about the turnaround time that it takes to write a book, edit it, design it, and then publish it, by the time you get it, that information is usually widely available, say, on the internet.
Yeah.
So it's hard for us because it'd have to be a game that we pick up when it's relatively new, so that we're not the third or 30th or 300th person that's trying to share information about it.
Yeah.
And we have to spend enough time playing it to develop any kind of insight on it.
I think that stuff too speaks to a little bit of a bygone era of content where stuff could really be secret or a mystery or not widely known, but known by a sort of select few in a way that it can't be anymore. And I think one game that actually tried to recapture that to pretty successfully, I want to say, is Frog Fractions 2. Have you heard of it?
No.
So Frog Fractions is one of those like weird meta games where it is sort of showcased as something else. It showcased as one thing and then is something quite different. So it's like this big, like, sprawling, weird RPG thing, disguised as like a frog, like a math game, basically, like a children's math game. And one of the things is they did a Kickstarter for Frog Fractions 2, and they made their money. And for the Kickstarter, they said they would release the game but not tell people where they released it. And so there was a while where they said the game is out and people had to... I don't remember the exact thing. I haven't... I don't know the story in full, right? So I'm not going to be able to repeat it in full. But the game, it was hidden within another game. It was not labeled as Frog Fractions 2 and it's not marketed as Frog Fractions 2. And people had to find it. They had to figure out where the game was.
So all your Kickstarter thing got you was the ability to know that you could start looking.
Well, it was like a scavenger hunt. Yeah, and then once people found it, there's it was a game on Steam. I forget what it is. It's like some weird fairy game. And it was released by Adult Swim. And I don't mean fairy in any derogatory term. I mean like it was like a game where you play as like... It's some sort of like
a pixie.
Base building, pixie game. Yeah. And so like I think that did successfully. But the problem is once, people found it, right? And disseminated that information, it was out there again instead of it being like a rumor that spread. Right? But I think, back when you had the capability to like, hide secrets inside like game manuals and stuff and have like sort of extra media that was inherently tied to it, right? Have a lot of extra sources for content, and then have a lot of content be sort of naturally hidden just by the fact that if you had to figure it out, not everybody would know it. I think you could make fundamentally different types of game experiences back then versus what you can do now.
Right.
Interesting. There's no specific point to that. I just think it's sort of interesting to think about what there was an opportunity to do and there isn't the same way anymore. And I'm sure there are ways to recapture that, and I think some developers, like in the case of Far Cry 2, are trying to.
Right. But and that brings us right to the end. We've just run out of time.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. Here right at the end, we'd like to give a huge thank you to all of our patrons.
Big thank you to Console Peasant supporting us at the highest tier, Last Word, John Auriemma at the Your Message Here tier, Shawn, Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Mall, and Michael DeVries, who support us on the credited level, and Eddie G and Chris Wolf at the gratitude level.
thanks so much for watching, and thanks so much for all of your support in any form. We'll see you next time.
Komoda.